When I reached the fine age of 11, I realized that deep down inside of me, there was a monster brewing. In others, too, I realized monsters were brewing, people around my age in particular. Now, maybe not the kind of monster with fangs, claws, wings, and big, scary eyes, but sometimes it felt like it. The adults, they called this puberty, a word that up until now I have never liked the sound of. But that monster is still right here, helping me change, helping me grow up. It's funny how, as children, it was the monsters we were scared of. But as teenagers, for the first time in forever, we are the monsters. And as the monsters, we have many stories to tell. Growing up has always been relevant. It's universal. Throughout history, time has changed almost everything in this world, and in turn, its people. But the transition from childhood to adulthood remains inevitable. It's a once-in-a-lifetime change that everyone remembers. We see this through the stories, the coming-of-age genre. Today, when we imagine a teen or coming-of-age story, we often picture a noisy, colorful, often overly sexualized teen rom-com. But from the stories of Homer, Shakespeare, Austen, the Brontes, the coming-of-age trope has always been important. There's a reason why so many aspects of popular culture revolve around the journey of teenagers. Since the dawn of time, growing pains are hard. Teenagers seek stories of people they find relatable. Although they may be part of very different periods in history, an ocean, an entire language away, it is these stories that bring them together. Sometimes, stories really are enough to form a connection. From debutante balls in the 1800s to high school proms in the modern day, everyone has a coming-of-age story to tell. Before this, the idea of growing up has never particularly fascinated me. When I got to middle school, I was tired of adults telling me about adolescence, the supposedly glorious yet angsty period of life, full of simultaneous fun and trouble and that dreaded word, hormones. I'm sure some of us remember hearing about the butterfly metaphor once first starting middle school. But I never saw myself as an emerging butterfly. I think that as teenagers that rather than moving into our cocoons, we're moving out into the world. We're constantly changing, evolving, moving. As I progressed through middle school, I preoccupied myself during weekends with the usual books and movies. But of course, the genre that attracted me the most was the coming-of-age genre. It was exciting, funny, and at times surprisingly relatable. I stumbled across classic coming-of-age stories adapted into modern movies. Amongst my favorites were Emma, adapted into Clueless, Shakespeare's Taming of the Shrew into 10 Things I Hate About You, and Shakespeare's Twelfth Night into She's the Man. I realized that no matter the time period, we were all interconnected by this one grand stage of life, the stage of in-between. During Christmas break of 8th grade, I stumbled across a small, practically ancient little book, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. I read it over the holiday, trying to figure out whatever it was Mary Shelley was trying to get across to me through the long, heavy intrigue that was Gothic literature. But when I reached the end of the book, I saw its plot in a different light. What if we, the teenagers, were monsters and our parents were the mad scientists? Because, in a slightly twisted yet inescapably true way, we were experiments of our parents. I've definitely heard adults whisper to each other, teenagers are scary. And like monsters, teenagers are neither inherently good nor bad creatures. With fire to breathe, wings to fly, and scales to wield, the monster is complex and no doubt powerful. Through Frankenstein, Shelley brought beauty and compassion into the internal landscape of the monster. We've all been there for the journey of the hero, but what about the journey of the monster? I wanted to take this metaphor of the monster and the mad scientist and the concept of the monster's journey and put it onto paper. I wanted to adapt Frankenstein, a classic horror story, into a modern coming-of-age story addressing the mad scientists and monsters of this day through a piece of metafiction. I started by writing verses, short lines, spaces in between. As I wrote, they began to form letters, referencing Frankenstein's epistolary format. I divided them into two parts, part one being letters directed to the monsters or the teenagers, and part two directed to the parents or the mad scientists. Along with the writing came the illustrations, done in graphite with one red recurring watercolor mark, representing the travel, life, and vigor of the monster throughout its journey. With the help of my parents, I created a chapbook from my piece. Here it is. As well as a digital ebook. We got the artwork framed and auctioned them at the Faces of Mother Earth Challenge, where all proceeds are going to the local scholarship program. I want the letters and illustrations to act as messages to the reader, to be interpreted in the way they like, for the purpose to make them think, and if I'm lucky as a writer, to make them feel something. Above all, through each drawing and each line, I tried to be honest. I tried to put my true thoughts into each thing without being afraid to do so, which was challenging because trying to be as raw and honest as possible is always, in some ways for me, a little bit uncomfortable. And it was hard to get started at first because in the moment, everything about being a teenager just seems so ordinary. It seems like there isn't much to write, not much to reflect on. But when I really look back at everything I've earned and everything I've lost versus when I was a kid 3 years ago, the words flow seamlessly. I begin to notice my own journey as a monster. I didn't start this project to change the world or fix a very particular problem. So at first I wondered why it was worth doing in the first place. But I realized that coming of age is important. We all have a story to tell. My coming of age story isn't over yet. It was, however, gratifying and oddly cathartic to be able to put it into the two languages I understand best, words and 6 shades of graphite. It's amazing how each and every one of us can transfer some of the most intriguing parts of our mind into a story. And to me, a story isn't just a narrative built up by paragraphs. Stories are told through speech, movement, television, color. It just happens that one of my own stories is told through pen and pencil. At the end of the day, stories are parts of our minds put into creation. And one of the most important stories to tell is the process of growing up. We love to see a good teen rom-com or drama, but for once, let's look at our own coming-of-age stories, whether that's looking back at it, looking forward to it, or maybe you're experiencing it right now, watching the process unfold through you as the days pass by. Change within ourselves is what makes the teenage years ever so important. No matter what time in history, where you are, or who you are, it's a story that deserves to be heard. So maybe you don't feel like a character in a story, a peppery cheerleader out of a 2000s movie, an angsty Holden Caulfield out of a 50s novel. Maybe it seems silly to compare your own life to a story. But the characters in these stories, they share their own stories in hopes that they reach someone similar, someone who can relate, laugh, and cry alongside them. So at the end of the day, every monster story, whether that's told through pages, a screen, a microphone, a stage, should be heard. As writer Lisa Cron once said, story, as it turns out, was crucial to our evolution, more so than opposable thumbs. Opposable thumbs let us hang on. A story told us what to hang on to. When I look forward, I still see myself with a pen, paintbrush, and ink in hand. I'd be lying if I told you I knew where that story was going, but I do hope to have it on paper one day. I'd like to thank my teachers for guiding me through this whole quest process, as well as my parents, my mad scientist, for always being there with advice, support, and great ideas. Goodbye for now. See you in the next chapter.